Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into some pretty significant movements happening in the AI industry, like right now.
Yeah.
We've got sources covering specific companies, think Perplexity, Anthropic, EleutherAI, but also looking at the bigger picture with investment trends.
And the idea here, I think, is to cut through some of the noise. There's a lot happening. We want to pull out the really important insights for this information, help you understand the landscape and, well, what's really driving things based on these sources.
Exactly. So, mission for today: unpack these sources, find the surprising bits, the connections, and figure out what it all means for where AI is headed for you, the listener. Okay, let's get into it. Perplexity seems like a good place to start.
Definitely a fascinating one, especially when you look at the numbers they're talking about.
Right. I mean, the scale is pretty striking. Perplexity's CEO mentioned hitting 780 million queries. That was just last month, May. And he claimed, over 20% month-over-month growth? Think about that curve. They reportedly started with maybe 3,000 queries on day one back in 2022.
Tiny.
And now they're talking 30 million a day. He even put a marker down, projecting they could hit maybe 1 billion queries a week within a year if they keep that pace up.
Which, I mean, putting those numbers in perspective, it tells a story of just incredibly fast user adoption, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Going from a few thousand to tens of millions daily and talking about billions weekly, that suggests a lot of people are finding real value there.
Yeah.
And that sort of conversational AI search approach, it really shows how fast the AI search market isn't just, popping up, but it's grabbing mainstream attention, changing how people look for things.
And the CEO was pretty clear about what he thinks is key for keeping that growth going. It's this new browser they're building, Comet.
Right, the browser play.
Yeah, he used this phrase that stuck with me: infinite retention. The idea being, if users are in the browser, you capture everything. Extra queries from the search bar, new tabs, those sidecars on pages. Plus, pulling in new users who are maybe tired of, as he put it, legacy browsers like Chrome.
And that browser strategy, it signals a really fundamental shift, I think.
Yeah.
It's moving AI from just, fetching an answer, maybe replacing 4 or 5 old-style searches,
Right.
to actually doing things, getting a whole browsing task done from one prompt. But you can't just slap AI onto an old browser for that.
Doesn't work that well.
No.
Yeah.
It means rethinking the whole thing. You need that seamless mix of compute power on your device and on the server. Hybrid stuff.
And he framed it even bigger. Not just a browser, but a cognitive operating system.
Yeah, saw that.
Something proactive, personalized, that sort of lives with you for work, for life. He tied it to the fact that, well, let's face it, most of us do live on the internet now.
And crucially, the sources mentioned the business model angle here, too. The CEO reportedly said back in April, a big reason for the browser is tracking user activity outside their app. That data, that's for selling premium ads. He apparently drew a direct line to how Google built its business.
Makes sense.
And the timing for Comet. Recent comments suggest coming weeks, so pretty soon.
Wow. Okay. That whole idea of redefining search, it's huge. And it makes me think about Anthropic, actually. They're making some big strategic moves, too, but more around governance and security.
Right.
Our sources flagged the appointment of Richard Fontaine. He's described as a national security expert. And this came literally the day after they reportedly announced new AI models specifically for U.S. national security uses.
Yeah, and that appointment is really interesting because of Anthropic's unique structure. Fontaine's joining their long-term benefit trust.
Okay, what exactly is that trust?
So for you listening, Anthropic set this up as a governance thing. They say it's designed to put safety ahead of just making profits. And it actually has power. It can elect some of the company's board members. The sources name others in the trust: Zachary Robinson, Neil Buddy Shah, Kanika Ball. And they make it clear Fontaine won't have a financial stake, as a trustee.
And the Anthropic CEO, Dario Amodei, his comments really hit this home. He said Fontaine helps the trust handle these complex decisions where AI meets security.
Right.
And he framed it bigger, too, saying it's essential for democratic nations to lead in responsible AI for global security. Fontaine's background fits foreign policy advisor, academic, ran a national security think tank.
And this connects directly to Anthropic getting more involved with U.S. national security customers as a potential revenue source. Right.
Makes good.
Sources mention recent tie-ups, like teaming up with Palantir and AWS. And just to clarify, AWS is Amazon's cloud arm, and also a major investor in Anthropic.
Okay.
And they're working together specifically to sell Anthropic's AI into defense applications.
And we should probably point out, Anthropic isn't alone in this, are they?
No, not at all.
The sources show it's a broader trend. OpenAI reportedly wants closer ties with the U.S. Defense Department. Meta is making Llama models available to defense partners. Google's working on Gemini for classified stuff. Cohere's also working with Palantir. It's happening across the board.
Absolutely. It points to this bigger intersection of advanced AI with national security, government, critical infrastructure, Fontaine's hiring, plus other recent ones like Reed Hastings from Netflix joining their board.
Right, I remember that.
It looks like Anthropic is deliberately, beefing up its leadership to navigate this really complex, sensitive area.
Okay, so we have Perplexity changing search, Anthropic dealing with governance and security. Let's shift gears to something really fundamental, the data. The stuff these models learn from.
Yes.
EleutherAI, they're an AI research group. They just put out something pretty significant, addressing some real industry pain points.
Yeah, the Common Pile V0.1 dataset. What's notable is they're calling it one of the largest collections of specifically licensed and open domain text for AI training.
Licensed and open domain, that's key.
It is. That's a big 8 terabytes, apparently. It took about 2 years, involved collaborations with startups, universities, others.
And this lands right in the middle of that whole legal mess, doesn't it?
Exactly. The context is these lawsuits against big AI companies like OpenAI,
Right.
accusing them of training models by just scraping the web, grabbing copyrighted books, articles, whatever, without asking.
And the companies usually say fair use, right? That legal defense.
Yeah, that's the common defense.
Uh-huh.
Allows limited use of copyrighted stuff for things like research sometimes. But it's being heavily contested here.
And EleutherAI argues this whole situation has actually hurt transparency.
That's their point. Stella Biderman, their executive director, says these lawsuits make AI companies clam up about their data.
Which makes it harder for researchers.
Precisely. Harder to understand how the models work, find flaws, check for bias. Some companies apparently even cite the lawsuits as a reason not to publish research, especially on data-heavy stuff.
So given that backdrop, how did EleutherAI build this data set, the Common Pile, to be, legally safer?
Well, the sources say they worked with legal experts. They focused on sources clearly identified as licensed or public domain.
Like what?
Examples given are like 300,000 public domain books digitized by the Library of Congress and the Internet Archive.
Okay.
They even used OpenAI's own open-source Whisper model to transcribe audio, turning spoken words into licensed text data.
And what about performance? Can models trained only on this licensed stuff actually compete?
That's the fascinating claim EleutherAI is making. They released 2 models trained on it, V.11t and V0.12t, both 7 billion parameters, kind of mid-sized models.
Okay.
And they claim these models perform on par with models trained using, unlicensed data. They even say they rival things like Meta's first Llama model on benchmarks for coding, math, image stuff.
Wow. Even though they only used a fraction of the new data set.
Right. Biderman's view reportedly is that this whole idea you need unlicensed text for top performance, she says it's unjustified. And she thinks models trained on licensed data will just keep getting better as more licensed data becomes available.
And we should probably remember, EleutherAI themselves released the Pile before, right? Which did have copyrighted stuff.
Good point. Yes, that earlier data set faced scrutiny. So this new commitment to releasing licensed data sets more often feels like a direct response.
Yeah.
It really highlights that ongoing tension, doesn't it, between closed, proprietary AI development and this push for open research and clean, transparent data.
Absolutely. It's a fundamental debate about the building blocks.
Yeah.
Is scraping necessary, or is there a viable path with properly licensed data?
Yeah, maybe even a necessary path for the future.
Which brings us nicely to, the money. The investment side of all this AI frenzy.
Right.
Our sources paint a picture of AI startup investing right now as, exciting definitely, but also maybe riskier and more complicated than ever.
Yeah, he's got this weird dynamic, huge pressure from the big incumbents, OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, that they're scaling so fast. But at the same time, you have these brand new startups hitting what looks like the growth stage almost overnight, way faster than usual.
And that speed makes defining growth stage tricky, doesn't it?
Totally. Jill Chase from Capital G is quoted in the sources basically saying it's not so cut and dried anymore.
How so?
She talks about seeing companies like less than a year old already hitting tens of millions in recurring revenue, valuations over $1 billion.
Wow.
Metrics you normally see in much more mature companies. But often, these startups haven't built out the basics, yet solid safety processes, full exec teams, scalable hiring.
So Chase points out this paradox. It's exciting, right? Seeing that hypergrowth, awesome.
Yeah.
But she also says it's a little bit scary. You're paying this huge valuation for a company that, yeah, might be technically brilliant, but is incredibly young.
And the tech underneath is moving so fast.
Exactly. Someone else could be building the next big thing right now that makes this hot startup less relevant in, like, 12 months. She basically said it makes growth investing here a little confusing.
So to cut through that confusion, what are investors like Chase looking for? She mentioned needing to feel good not just about the AI category itself, but really confident in the founder's ability to pivot fast, to see around corners, as she put it.
Trusting the leadership can adapt.
Yeah, adapt as the underlying tech keeps shifting.
She used Cursor, the AI coding startup, as an example.
Hmm.
Capital G cited them as initially looking like a great case of jumping on the right niche at the right time with the tech available then.
Right, but that's the core challenge for a company like Cursor now. They have to keep evolving. Because as Chase and others expect, much more powerful AI software engineers are probably coming, maybe even by year end.
Which could sideline current tools.
Potentially, yeah. So these startups need to build their product surfaces, the part the user interacts with now, but in a way that lets them easily plug in and switch to newer, better models as they appear. Their long-term value might be less about the model they use today and more about their interface and agility.
Which really just sums up the whole challenge, doesn't it? For investors, for the startups themselves, navigating this incredible pace of change and betting on who can adapt fast enough to stay ahead.
It's a constant race.
Okay, so let's try to pull these different threads together. What's the overall picture these sources paint about AI right now?
Well, we've seen a few key dynamics.
Yeah. We saw Perplexity aiming to completely redefine search, moving towards this browser or even OS concept, driven by that massive growth.
Right. Then there's Anthropic, trying to balance building powerful AI with unique governance and getting deeper into sensitive areas like national security.
And EleutherAI challenging the status quo on data, pushing for transparency and licensed alternatives amid all the legal fights.
And finally, the investment scene, just grappling with this breakneck speed and figuring out how to assess risk when things change so fast.
So what does this tell us about the field overall?
I think it shows it's not just about building bigger models anymore. That's part of it, sure. But it's also fundamentally changing how we access and use AI. That's Perplexity. How it gets governed and integrated into really key sectors like security, that's Anthropic. How we deal with the foundational data issues legally and ethically, that's EleutherAI. And how capital flows into this landscape with all its unique risks. That's the investment piece. The field's transforming on like multiple fronts all at once. It's interconnected.
Which leads to a final thought, maybe something for you, the listener, to chew on.
Yeah, given this incredible speed we've talked about, especially with products and investments, where a tool's relevance can just plummet in months, maybe weeks, when a new model drops.
Right.
How does that kind of speed just shatter traditional cycles of innovation and investment? And what does it actually mean for trying to build anything designed to last in AI right now?
That's a really pertinent question to end on, thinking about building for permanence in such a rapidly shifting landscape. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the current AI scene. We hope this gave you a clear perspective on these complex dynamics and maybe sparked some new questions for you. Keep exploring.
Absolutely. It's a field where staying informed and asking those tough questions is, well, pretty essential right now.